Chapter 3, the recognition. We just continue directly where we left off from the previous chapter. Hester Prynne is standing on that platform, and she's, thinking, if you remember from the previous chapter, thinking about her past, trying to just stay distracted from this strange situation. And as she is staring out sort of vacantly at the crowd, she notices somebody. She sees an Indian in his native garb standing, like along the back of the crowd, with another man. By the Indian's side, and evidently sustaining a companionship with him, stood a white man, clad in a strange disarray of civilized and savage costume. So this indicates he's wearing traditional clothing, like the colonists would wear, but also wearing some Native American clothing. So he's sort of got an array of things on to keep himself warm. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, it's June. How many clothes do you need to wear in June? So it's interesting. It's a very strange person, clearly. And then she describes him. He was small, with a furrowed visage, meaning like furrowed means your eyebrows are maybe knitted close together, or your forehead is wrinkled. Visage is like your face, your appearance. So he looks sort of like, maybe like he's scowling, or maybe like he's dissatisfied or stressed, which as yet could hardly be termed aged. So he's not really old, but he kind of has like a wrinkly look about him because of his expression. There was a remarkable intelligence in his features. So he seems like he's smart. I don't know, how do you tell that from someone by looking, but she recognizes him as somebody who seems intelligent. And then she also noticed that he has like this careless arrangement of his clothes. He has endeavored to conceal or abate the peculiarity. It was sufficiently evident to Hester Prynne that one of this man's shoulders rose higher than the other. So clearly this is a mystery person. This is interesting to me. This reminds me, and I have a little arrow here, of what we read over here at the end of chapter 2. She was remembering someone in her past who had a left shoulder slightly higher than the right. So I'm like, okay, is this the same person? It's a logical conclusion. So the baby starts to cry, but Hester ignores it. The mother, meaning Hester, doesn't even seem to realize that the baby is fussy. She's so distracted by this person. And then this stranger is looking at Hester Prynne. It was carelessly at first, but then his look became keen and penetrative. A writhing horror twisted itself across his features like a snake, gliding swiftly over them and making one little pause with all its wreathed intervolutions in open sight. So this is creepy. Like clearly he is not happy to see her up there. He seems upset by it. His face darkened with some powerful emotion, which nevertheless he so instantaneously controlled by an effort of will. So he's upset and he's trying to hide it. When he found the eyes of Hester Prynne fastened on his own and saw that she appeared to recognize him, so now I'm thinking this is someone from her past, he slowly and calmly raised his finger and laid it on his lips. So he's telling her, shh, don't say anything. Don't let it be known that you recognize me. Then he reaches over to a man next to him and asks, who is this woman? He pretends he doesn't know. And the man says, oh, surely you've heard of Mistress Hester Prynne and her evil doings. She hath raised a great scandal, I promise you, in godly Master Dimmesdale's church. So this woman is a sinner. She has done something terrible in our community. And the man says, I'm a stranger. I have been wandering against my will. I have met with grievous mishaps by sea and land, and have been long held in bonds among the heathen folk to the southward, and am now brought hither by this Indian to be redeemed out of my captivity. So he was taken prisoner by Native Americans, perhaps, or somebody in the South. He had trouble getting to this location. What is this woman's offense? Like, what has she done? And we get an explanation here. And so this is helpful for us. We're getting a little bit of Hester Prynne's actual history, not just her memories of her past. The man from the town says, "Truly, friend, and methinks it must gladden your heart after your troubles and sojourn in the wilderness, to find yourself at length in a land where iniquity is searched out and punished in the sight of rulers and people, as here in our godly New England. Like, you must be so happy to be here, because we know what's right and what's wrong, and we hold people accountable. Yonder woman, sir, you must know, was the wife of a certain learned man, English by birth, but who had long ago dwelt in Amsterdam, when some good time agone he was minded to cross over and cast in his lot with us of the Massachusetts. To this purpose he sent his wife before him, remaining himself to look after some necessary affairs. Marry, good sir, in some 2 years or less that the woman has been a dweller here in Boston, no tidings have come of this learned gentleman, Master Prynne, and his young wife, look you, being left to her own misguidance." Okay, so the story here is that Hester Prynne was sent to Massachusetts ahead of her husband, and her husband was to follow her, and she has been there waiting for her husband for 2 years. That's important. "Aha, I conceive you," said the stranger with a bitter smile. "So learned a man as you speak of should have learned this too in his books. And who, by your favor, sir, may be the father of the yonder babe? It is some 3 or 4 months old, I should judge, which Mistress Prynne is holding in her arms. Of a truth, friend, that matter remaineth a riddle. Like, we don't know who the father is, and the Daniel who shall expound it is yet a wanting," answered the townsman. "Madam Hester absolutely refused to speak. Peradventure the guilty one stands looking on at this sad spectacle, unknown of man and forgetting that God sees him. So surely this man who fathered the baby is in the town. He's probably standing here right now looking at her, thinking that he's getting away with it, but God knows." That's what the man says. "The learned man," observed the stranger with another smile, "should come himself to look into the mystery." Okay, so this is ironic. I mean, it's reasonable to think that perhaps this man with the crooked shoulder, who looks like he's intelligent, might be Hester's husband showing up at just this moment. That's a good guess. "It behooves him well if he still be in life," responded the townsman. "Now, good sir, our Massachusetts magistracy, bethinking themselves that this woman is youthful and fair, and doubtless was strongly tempted to her fall, and that, moreover, as is most likely her husband may be at the bottom of the sea, maybe not, that they have been bold to put in force the extremity of our righteous law against her. The penalty thereof is death." So he's saying, like, she's young and beautiful, and, it's been 2 years, and she was tempted. Some man took advantage of her. Normally, the penalty would be death for adultery like this. But in their great mercy and tenderness of heart, they have doomed Mistress Prynne to stand only a space of 3 hours on the platform, and then and thereafter, for the remainder of her life, to wear a mark of shame upon her bosom. So he's explaining what the punishment is. "A wise sentence. Thus she will be a living sermon against sin." I could see this being on a quote test or something. "But he will be known. He will be known." So this stranger is strongly emphasizing that he believes that the actual father will be discovered. Of course, because perhaps if this is her husband, he would like to know who is the father of this child. So this whole time, Hester has been standing on her pedestal, looking at the stranger, watching him talk to this other man. So I'm just going to jump here. Dreadful as it was, she was conscious of a shelter in the presence of these 1,000 witnesses. It was better to stand thus, with so many betwixt him and her, than to greet him face to face, they two alone. So she's afraid of him, and she doesn't want to have to talk to him one-on-one. So she actually thinks it's kind of good I'm standing up here because the crowd is going to keep me away from him. She fled for refuge, as it were, to the public exposure and dreaded the moment when its protection would be withdrawn from her. Involved in these thoughts, she scarcely heard a voice behind her until it had repeated her name. Hearken unto me, Hester Prynne. Okay, so she's being spoken to now by the men up above looking down on the platform. So they're like on a second floor balcony of a building, kind of presiding over this punishment. These are sort of the governor, the head clergy, like this is the government basically of the town. And so we're getting some new characters introduced. These are important people. I think it's tempting just to skim through this and not read it, but it is important to have an understanding of who these people are and kind of their attitude about her in particular. So here to witness the scene which we are describing sat Governor Bellingham himself, with 4 sergeants about his chair. And then they're going to describe him. I mean, he's wearing a dark feather in his hat. He has an embroidered sort of cloak and a black velvet tunic. He's very well dressed. He was not ill-fitted to be the head and representative of a community which owed its origin and progress and its present state of development not to the impulses of youth, but to the stern and tempered energies of manhood. Okay, so that means he is well fitted to lead this community because he is older, he has experience, he is stern, he's measured, he doesn't do things impulsively. He accomplishes so much because he imagines and hopes for so little. So if you think about, this is the middle of the 17th century. We're in the 1600s. These are the colonists who have just come to America. They are trying to make a life for themselves. It's hard. It's very difficult. And you can imagine that their rule of law is very much the focus because they don't want anything to go wrong that they could potentially prevent. So the other eminent characters by whom the chief ruler was surrounded were distinguished by a dignity of mien belonging to a period when the forms of authority were felt to possess the sacredness of divine institutions. So again, we already sort of learned this from the introduction, but government and religion go hand in hand. And they also do feel like they are predestined, Americans felt, the colonists felt, that they were predestined to come to America. They were looking for religious freedom. They were looking for independence. And so you can imagine that they would focus very keenly on their religious beliefs and that their communities would be ruled with a religious emphasis. But of the whole human family, it would not have been easy to select the same number of wise and virtuous persons who should be less capable of sitting in judgment on an erring woman's heart and disentangling its mesh of good and evil than the sages of rigid aspect towards whom Hester Prynne now turned her face. So I think you and I might debate this. I'm not so sure. Hester Prynne is going to be fairly judged by these older men. But at the time, and certainly Nathaniel Hawthorne, he could be sarcastically saying this, but he also might be saying it because this was the belief at the time, legitimately, was that these men knew what they were doing. And so, she is getting the appropriate treatment. The voice now, another voice calls to her, and this is from the Reverend and famous John Wilson, the eldest clergyman of Boston, a great scholar like most of his contemporaries in the profession, and withal a man of kind and genial spirit. So this is the head clergy of all of Boston. This last attribute, however, had been less carefully developed than his intellectual gifts. So he's more of an intellect than he is a reverend. He's not so much a minister as he is a scholar. There he stood with a border of grizzled locks beneath his skull cap, while his gray eyes, accustomed to the shaded light of his study, were winking, like those of Hester's infant, in an unadulterated sunshine. He looked like the darkly engraved portraits which we see prefixed to old volumes of sermons, and had no more right than one of those portraits would have to step forth, as he now did, and meddle with the question of human guilt, passion, and anguish. So he's not really qualified. I mean, now we're getting the sense that, maybe he's not that much of a clergyman. He's more of a scholar. Maybe he doesn't really have any business questioning her. So there's definitely some sort of sarcasm about who has the right to be getting in the middle of Hester's affairs. Hester Prynne, said the clergyman, I have striven with my young brother here, under whose preaching of the word you have been privileged to sit, and this is referring to Dimmesdale. Reverend Dimmesdale is the pastor, the reverend of their community church, and he would sort of answer to John Wilson. John Wilson might be sort of like, managing him a little bit. And he is trying to persuade Hester to say, who is the man? I have sought, I say, to persuade this godly youth that he should deal with you here in the face of heaven and before these wise and upright rulers, and in hearing of all the people, as touching as the vileness and blackness of your sin. Like, I've been trying to get Dimmesdale to make you confess who did this. You should no longer hide the name of him who tempted you to this grievous fall. So they're setting her up to kind of give her an out. Like, you name the person, we're going to say that's the greatest sinner, that maybe you were a victim. That's what he's suggesting. Truly, as I sought to convince him, the shame lay in the commission of the sin and not in the showing of it forth. What say you to it once again, brother Dimmesdale? Must it be thou or I that shall deal with this poor sinner's soul? Like, will you deal with her, or am I going to deal with her? Like, who's going to be managing this sinner in your community? There was a murmur among the dignified and reverend occupants from the community. Good Master Dimmesdale, the responsibility of this woman's soul lies greatly with you. It behooves you to exhort her to repentance and to confession. It's like, make her confess. This is best for her soul. So now we're going to get a little bit more of a description of Reverend Dimmesdale. His eloquence and religious fervor had already given the earnest of high eminence in his profession. He was a person of very striking aspect, with a white, lofty, and impending brow, large, brown, melancholy eyes, and a mouth which, unless he forcibly compressed it, was apt to be tremulous, which means like trembling, expressing both nervous sensibility and a vast power of self-restraint. So he's emotional, is what we can get from this. Notwithstanding his high native gifts and scholar-like attainments, there was an air about this young minister, an apprehensive, a startled, a half-frightened look, as if being who felt himself quite astray and at a loss in the pathway of human existence, and could only be at ease in some seclusion of his own. So he seems vulnerable and tender, like maybe he's too gentle for the world, like maybe he needs to be more by himself. Therefore, so far as his duties would permit, he trod in the shadowy bypaths and kept himself simple and childlike. So he's very he's kind of basic. Such was the young man whom Reverend Mr. Wilson and the governor had introduced so openly to the public notice, bidding him to speak. So Reverend Dimmesdale is getting big pressure here to say something. So he bends his head in prayer, and then he does talk to her. Hester Prynne, he says, thou hearest what this good man says. If thou feelest it to be for thy soul's peace, and that thy earthly punishment will thereby be made more effectual to salvation, I charge thee to speak out the name of thy fellow sinner and fellow sufferer. Be not silent from any mistaken pity and tenderness for him, for believe me, Hester, though he were to step down from a high place and stand there beside thee on thy pedestal of shame, yet better were it so than to hide a guilty heart through life. So it's better for the sinner to be revealed, because then he also can atone for his sins and he can have salvation. Now, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking to myself, as I'm sure you are, there's nothing stopping him from confessing, whoever this man is. Why does Hester have to do it? Well, because by doing so, it would somehow relieve her even more, because she's keeping a secret. The young pastor's voice was tremulously sweet, rich, deep, and broken. So I think he's a flawed man, clearly, this minister. Even the poor baby at Hester's bosom was affected by the same influence. Like, everybody is moved by him. He's so real and tender that people respond to him emotionally. Even the baby, who gazes up at Mr. Dimmesdale and held up its little arms with a half-pleased, half-plaintive murmur. So powerful seemed the minister's appeal that the people could not believe but that Hester would speak. But she shakes her head. No. Woman, transgress not beyond the limits of heaven's mercy, cried the Reverend Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is frustrated. That little baby hath been gifted with a voice to second and confirm the counsel which thou hast heard. Speak out the name. For your child's sake, speak out the name, is what he's saying. Never, replied Hester, looking not at Mr. Wilson, but into the deep and troubled eyes of Reverend Dimmesdale. It is too deeply branded. You cannot take it off, and would that I might endure his agony as well as mine. She's not going to reveal him. She's going to carry his agony with her. Speak, woman, speak, and give your child a father. I will not speak, answered Hester, turning pale as death, but responding to his voice, which she too surely recognized. And my child must seek a heavenly father. She shall never know an earthly one. So the person who yells out, speak, woman, the crowd, maybe it's the guy with the crooked shoulder. So the child will have a father in God, is what she's saying. And then Reverend Dimmesdale says she will not speak. In fact, he murmurs it. Wondrous strength and generosity of a woman's heart. She will not speak. Seems like he's kind of relieved. Maybe he's kind of impressed with her. So the elder clergymen, they kind of give up. They're like, all right, what else can we do? Hester stands up there still on the pedestal of shame, all the eyes looking at her. She had borne that morning all that nature could endure. And as her temperament was not of the order that escapes from too intense suffering by a swoon, her spirit could only shelter itself beneath a stony crust of insensibility while the faculties of animal life remained entire. So she's trying not to pass out. She's trying to endure this. In this state, the voice of the preacher thundered remorselessly, but unavailingly upon her ears. The infant, during the latter portion of her ordeal, pierced the air with its wailings and scream. So the baby starts to cry. Think about it. She's standing out there for 3 hours in the heat. Hester Prynne tried to hush it mechanically, but seemed to barely sympathize. So she's kind of just going through the motions of quieting the baby, but doesn't really care if the baby is quiet. I think it's also important to catch here that the baby is a girl. That has just been sort of made very clear, but a lot of times a baby is referred to still as just an it, which is kind of interesting. Finally, she gets to step down. With the same hard demeanor, she was led back to prison and vanished from the public gaze with its iron-clamped portal. I'm sure she was so relieved to get back in that prison. It was whispered by those who peered after her that the scarlet letter threw a lurid gleam along the dark passageway of the interior. It's kind of gothic and scary. So Governor Bellingham, this is a new character. John Wilson, who is the head clergy of Boston, also a new character. And then we have a mystery visitor. So we will definitely find out more about him in chapters to come.